Hello, and welcome to Talking Toddlers, where I share more than just tips and tricks on how to reduce tantrums or build your toddler's vocabulary. We're going to cover all of that, I assure you. But here, our goal is to develop clarity, because in this modern world, it's truly overwhelming, especially during these past 2 years. This podcast is about empowering moms to know the difference between fact and fiction, to never give up, to tap into everyday activities so your child stays on track. He's not falling behind, he's thriving through your guidance. We know that true learning starts at home, and Talking Toddlers, this podcast helps you develop that with clarity, confidence, and clear communication. So let's get started. Good morning and welcome back to Talking Toddlers. I'm Erin Heyer, your host, and this week I want to talk about parenting in this modern world. And I recognize that there are challenges that are very unique, not only because of the last 2 years that parents have had to face and deal with and learn in real time. And I do think that parenting in general, from the beginning of time, is a challenge. Learning how to, survive, learning how to love, learning how to guide and protect, building your family, building a community. But these past 2 years seem to really have shined a light on the vulnerabilities, which then increase our stress, our worry, our overwhelm, and certainly the uncertainty of parenting. What will the future hold? What will tomorrow hold? Am I doing well so I can be present and support and love and guide and nurture my beautiful children that are a gift from God Almighty? That's what I believe. On this podcast, I'm really speaking more and more directly to the moms, because we typically take the brunt of it, take at least, especially, and I've said this for decades, especially during those first 5, 7, 10 years. Our role typically is kind of out front and center, and it then ends up playing differently. So my purpose here on this podcast is that, for the people that I serve and the relationships I am building, it's typically with the mother. Yes, I speak and coach and consult with the dads too, but for the most part, it's the moms. That's who have always not connected with on purpose. It's just that's how private therapists typically build that relationship, that working relationship. Yes, I work with the whole family. I talk and give advice on the siblings, and dads are certainly involved, or both moms or both dads, whomever it is. Here's a recent statistic that I just kind of ran across. Even though 70% of women, or moms, 70% of moms are part of the workforce. So they're working outside of the house, or now they're working inside the house. They are usually the ones that bring their kids to therapy. So for the most part, that's who I'm speaking with. If I'm sitting down and meeting a new family, I'll meet with a mom. So, some theories behind that. And again, it's just what kind of traditional private practice settings have been. And these are just my impressions. Maybe it's because we, as the moms, typically, again, these are generalities, typically carry them in our womb. So we're more connected to the babies. We're more connected to the toddlers. And when they're typically young. Dads are an important part of this puzzle. Don't get me wrong. But today, and for the most part, I'm speaking to you, mom. And yes, there are different situations if the child is adopted, and I include all of that. And so I don't want to exclude anyone, but my perspective as a professional and as a mother, that's what I'm bringing to the table. So just, keep that in mind, that I do speak in generalities, which then means the majority, men and women, moms and dads, have different connections with their children. And we all do. I mean, my mom was, had 9 children, and she had different relationships with each and every one of us. And, one of the things that she shared with me toward the end of her life, because I asked her, I said, Mom, why is it that every birthday card you give or a graduation card that you give, you always sign it, love your mother? What the heck does that mean, Mom? And she said, well, in that moment of time, here I have nine kids, 5 boys, 4 girls. She was spread pretty darn thin. She said, but in that moment, giving you that card, I was only your mother for that split second. And I thought, that's cool. I'm going to take that. And unfortunately we lost her when she was very young, 57. So what basically all of this means is that I'm typically speaking to the moms. I just want to kind of explain what my practice has always been. I do, consultations with both parents, and, and I'll be totally transparent, totally honest here, that I do have, kind of a different communication style, or my dialogue is different when I speak with the dads versus the moms. Not on purpose. It's just how we as human beings, I think, adjust our communication style. Not that I say things, that I would say to one person and not say to the other. No. What I'm just saying is just kind of the whole social exchange. And it could simply be that I'm a woman and that I'm a mother. And so I connect with the moms on a different human to human feeling. So with all that being said, part of my expertise is human communication. How do we acquire it? How do we improve it? How do we build upon this skill? And that's what it is. It is a skill. It's part of our DNA. And I've always talked about that, the difference between oral communication and written communication. That written is totally man-made, is contrived. It's a code, literally, that we have to break in order to use as a tool to record and learn and all of that, and communicate. But verbal communication is part of us being human, right? And I recognize that there are individual styles and that people do differ, but we have these developmental expectations. We do have social, parameters, and we have cultural parameters. And so I think we have to always take these into consideration. And trust me that, I've worked with hundreds and hundreds of children and parents and families. I don't pigeonhole anyone. I respect the bell curve, right? Which means that, if you think of, back in high school or in college, that bell curve where you have the average in the middle from about, 25th percentile to the 75th percentile. And then you want to get low average and high average. And so you would add, from the 15th percentile to the 85th percentile. So that's who I'm kind of talking. Yes, we're going to have these one-offs and these outliers. And that's a different conversation. And I do believe that there are no absolutes, especially when it comes to human beings or communication or learning or any of that. But, my purpose with this podcast is to share some good, strong evidence, some clinical experience and expertise, and how can we take this knowledge that has been shared in the science community, in the educational forums, in early development, in family relationships. How can we take that and implement it into your day-to-day life? How can I empower parents, new parents, to kind of understand the dynamic role that they're playing? I think, on a conscious level, we understand taking on parentship, but on this kind of emotional day-to-day level. And so I guess you're kind of asking, why are you giving me all of this backstory and what does this all mean? Because I can't cover quote unquote talking toddlers. And so I'm talking about how do we get toddlers to talk, and how do parents and educators and therapists talk about toddlers. But and so that includes early childhood development, creating a language-rich home environment, learning how to shape and guide with the knowledge of how the brain learns to learn. And so I have to include all of that, but I can't dismiss or ignore the whole parenting mindset. And I'm using mindset in air quotes for a lack of a better word, but sometimes is referred to other things. And so, but I really, really think, especially in this day and age, parenting, when we step into this role, we do live in this fast-paced environment, and there's so much knowledge available to us, yet at the same time, where do you fit? You have your history of being raised by your family and your parents, being educated typically in a more or less traditional format, or maybe you were one that was homeschooled, a lot of, different versions, but you're bringing your experience, whether you're 25 or 35 or 45, you're a new parent, and you're bringing your life experience to the table to say, okay, how am I going to do this? And where do I go besides my pediatrician or my own mom? Where do I go to seek advice or counsel, or just to brainstorm ideas? So this mindset, this parenting mindset that, is kind of a buzzword now, but I think there's some true validity to this. And it's often used, there are other terms that are used, such as, and this is something recent that I've been diving into in the last year, reading work by a gentleman named Bob Proctor, and it's a little kind of out there. Some people might say it's like woo-woo, but it's really looking at, he termed it as a paradigm shift, right? That we can change our perspective. And let me give you his definition of what paradigm means. He and his partner, who is Sandy Gallagher, and it's a short little book that I think is great for all humans. I'm actually sharing it with a couple of teenage kids that I'm consulting with as they move on to college. But it's called Change Your Paradigm, Change Your Life. And in the foreword, they speak to a paradigm, quote, is a mental program situated in your subconscious that has almost exclusive control over all of your habitual behavior. And almost all of your behavior is habitual. So paradigms are a multitude of habits passed down from generation to generation, and they manifest themselves in many ways. Paradigms are the way you view yourself, the world, and opportunity. They continue with, they are how you approach change and challenges. Once you realize that all of your behavior is controlled by paradigms or mindsets, the way you look at the entire world will change. And Sandy Gallagher continues with, perhaps you know someone who seems habitually angry. upset at every turn in life, and unable to see the positive in any situation. Maybe you know someone who has battled fluctuating weight for years or decades. They seem to be on track for a while, getting healthy, dropping some weight, but they always seem to bounce back to where they once were. Perhaps you know someone who seems to be stuck at a certain level of income for years and can never seem to break through to the next level. All of these outcomes are controlled by paradigms. Just as paradigms can be a prison of one's making, they can also be changed to deliver you the freedom to be exactly the person you want to be. And lately, as I'm reading some of these business-based books or personal help books, or whatever you want to call them, I continually go back to how these thoughts and exercises, this mindset shifts, these are all very empowering tools that can also be used in parenting. Because, I've also read this with other parent coaches and parent mentors, with a wide variety of backgrounds. But they're, suggesting that moms, mostly moms, are actually the CEO or the CFO of the household, right? And yes, we have, a partner, or hopefully we have a partner. It's certainly easier when you have a partner, but I agree with this, that, these kind of business strategies, these personal mindset growth patterns can and should be applied to parenting. Because it also fits my belief and my understanding, my training, my experience as an adult over the last 35 years. Understanding how neuroplasticity, which is the physical change in our brain as we learn and grow and adapt, that we also need to look at what basic human nature is. That we're the only mammals that have this language which allows us to possess and to use and to cultivate and to nurture and to grow higher order language, which is then defined as thinking, reasoning, planning, problem solving, that we actually have an imagination that we can visualize and create based on our ability to think, and we think through language. And this is why it's always fascinated me to look at how the human baby and toddler and young elementary kid develops these skills and then uses them, to continue their life, whatever they choose to be. And that I believe anybody can become damn near anything they want to be, right? With the right work and you need coaching, you need guidance. You can't really do it alone. We can't. Babies can't survive alone. Toddlers can't. Young kids can't. Remember I said, in order to come into this world and survive and not kill mom during childbirth or crush the baby during, labor, and for the human being to have this large brain, it needed a lot more energy. So we needed to walk upright. And so we needed to negotiate with ourselves and the universe and the evolutionary process to have narrow hips to be able to walk upright. And so these babies, your baby, my baby, all came to us, you and me, out into this world really under construction, right? And so it takes a good 25 years for that frontal lobe to come to full fruition, sometimes 30 years plus. But for the most part, yes, a 16-year-old can survive on his or her own. Is that ideal? Not necessarily. So I'm sure you're asking, how the heck does this all fit together? And you might be saying, okay, Erin, let's get back to toddlers. But we can't talk about toddlers without talking about you, mom and dad and grandparents, but you mostly, mom, because parents need to put their oxygen mask on first. Take care of yourself physically, spiritually, emotionally, and then you're much more readily available to parent, to guide, to coach. And number two, parents, mostly moms, who are open to learning seem to create the biggest growth in themselves, in their children, in their family. And then that becomes a ripple effect. But all of this is packaged with the idea that it's a journey. It's learning, whether you're learning how to become a parent or learning how to improve your parentship or learning as a toddler. It's a process, and there's no perfect magic bullet. There's no perfect path. And although I do say, childhood and parenting is not really rocket science, and I can kind of joke about that because my darling husband does have a degree in space science, but it's not even neuroscience. It's human relationship. It's human building. And so just last week, this is an example, during a relatively new consultation with a parent, I was coaching with mom. This is maybe our second or third little visit. And she's lovely. She's smart. She's capable. She's a middle school teacher herself. And she said to me, gosh, Erin, you're not saying anything that is mind-blowing. I know all this stuff. I just need someone to kind of bounce ideas off of. I need someone to guide me through my own strength, my own faith in doing what's right for my children. And the truth is, that's what I've always said about my clinical work. I've said this hundreds of times, that there's nothing really magical or special about what I do in my therapy room or any really good therapist. When it's one-to-one child in there working and helping them build and strengthen their language processing, which includes attention and thinking and reasoning and all of these things, self-regulation. Yes, the difference is that I know the developmental milestones like the back of my hand, and I also know the subtle nuances that all kids kind of ebb and flow. And I know how to kind of support and pull back and support and it's a dance. It's a very, very sophisticated dance. But keep in mind, it's not linear. No child, no parenting, no learning whatsoever, whether you're learning how to drive a car or you're learning to tie your shoe or you're learning how to, make a bed. It's not linear, and you're going to make mistakes. So my purpose here is to reinforce to parents, again, mostly moms, that you have all of the specifics, the tactics at your fingertips. But mom, what I'm here for is to strengthen your faith in yourself, in your faith in your higher self, and to help build that courageous spirit in you to step into your role as a parent 1,000%, even if you're scared shitless, and to be open to embrace the process of parenting, the process of learning, and the process of your child growing into his or her best version of themselves. All children are different. I get that. But there are some basic steps along the way that will make it easier for them, for you, and for their future. So, with that being said, if you haven't listened to last week's episode, which focused on a fixed mindset versus a growth mindset. And I tried to really include the early, your early parenting with the little ones at 1 and 2 and 3 and 4, but also us, right? Are we open to expanding our mindset? Again, there's that term, and learning new skills on the job, right? And so go back and listen to last week's episode. You can also, if you haven't really listened to episode on what is your style of parenting, that would be a good one to listen to as well. Because all of these things are malleable. All of these things are changeable. All of these things can be shaped and reshaped, strengthened, and redefined. So please, please, please recognize that on any given day, we can have a fresh start. That on any given moment, that we can all just start over. We can take a walk and push the reset button. We could go into the bathroom, splash cold water on your face. Lately, I've been into trying ice face baths, if that makes sense. You create a big bowl full of ice water with ice, and you take a breath and you stick your face in there. It is incredibly motivating. I've also learned recently that, challenging yourself to hold your breath and not panic, and I go up to about 45 seconds. It's a process though. When I first started, it was 10 seconds. It's cold, but you know that by challenging yourself that there's a beginning, a middle, and an end, you can do this. Yeah, look it up. It's one of these kind of, biohacks or health hacks. It's worth exploring. But let me help you understand how I'm trying to connect the dots and forecast some episodes for you, which would include talking about the importance of play and how kids learn through play, that play is just the action. You and I think about play as kind of non-productive, and it's just a semantic, play on words, ha, ha, ha. But at this particular time, we're approaching the end of summer and there's a new school year before us. And I know that, I'm speaking to a wide variety of people who are, able to send their kids to a daycare or a preschool setting, pre-K. Some of you are homeschooling or giving your darling child a little bit more time at home with you. Hats off to you and being able to do that. But I also recognize this is a very, very personal decision and is based on several factors that are very personal and between you and your other family members. And again, these last 2 years have really thrown, the world upside down, and parents are rethinking this, and more families are keeping their little ones at home as long as possible, reconfiguring what the home and the work can be. And and I've said this in previous episodes, there's no such thing as a home life work balance. That's just a fallacy. But recognize that this too can be changed. Remember that new mom that I just spoke about a couple of minutes ago. And after our first and second consultation, and I met with the little guy and played with him and recognized his rich language and his wonderful essence of where he is developmentally. She and her husband decided, with some of my guidance, but again, it was a personal choice, to take their 4-year-old out of this highly structured, formal preschool setting, which was not serving him, and put him back in a kind of a home neighborhood, home daycare setting when there's just a couple of children. And, they had this other choice. They felt like they weren't completely stuck. Was it what they had planned on doing? No. But when they looked at their child's individual needs and they recognized that this public school setting, or I don't even know if it was public school, I think it was private, but it's directed in that mindset, right? That kids are kind of seen and not heard so much, and that there was a lot of physical outbursts. The boy was struggling and he was emotionally being squashed. And so the parents were able to look at what other options do we have and how can we manage this to help him through this phase, this developmental period. And I told them, I said, let's revisit come January. He's going to be 6 months older and the other kids are also going to be 6 months older. And maybe we can rethink this. But right now, he needs some place where he feels safe and secure, heard and respected, and that there's a lot of open-ended play. And that's key. So in regards to my upcoming episodes, I'm really going to dive into what is play and the importance of it. What does that mean? How is it building language? How is it building learning, the skills learning, and how you, mom and dad, and whatever daycare setting or preschool setting, how to look at how they respect play and foster it. But the other big thing that keeps popping up on the internet and popping up on social media is boredom. And how do we help kids learn to kind of tolerate boredom? And again, I think it kind of goes back to semantics, because what the heck is boredom? And what does it mean when a 4-year-old says, or a 6-year-old says, I'm bored? And what does that really mean? And how can we, as the adults in charge, help learn through that process? And that that maybe it's just kind of this buzzword in this fast-paced modern world that we're all trying to navigate and learn how to live through and raise healthy, happy, thriving children. So I'll also, in other episodes, talk more specifically about different types of play at different ages, making some suggestions about materials that you can use, and what does boredom really mean? And then when do we introduce quote unquote academics? And when is that important, relevant, useful? Because there's a whole heck of a lot of stuff that your 5 and 6-year-old needs to master before he or she's ready to sit at a desk and learn how to read and write and, all of that good stuff, those academic skills. But there's so much brain growth, brain development, social maturity, language-based learning that has to be pretty darn solid and secure before they can really successfully jump into, first grade material. And we can also talk about how some of the expectations are unrealistic nowadays. Again, in 2022, when we look at Common Core and we look at how school districts, both public and private, how state mandates, all of this, and it's trickled down. What we used to think a first grader should master is now kind of expected in the kindergarten classroom, and what a kindergartner used to deal with is now at the pre-K level. And is that helping? I don't know, but we can talk about that. And again, I go back to the bell curve. The vast majority of kids, where do they fall? And we can't ignore the elephant in the room, which is how these shifts in the school setting over the last 2 years has really affected all kids. But I think in the school environment, just the vibe, the energy, the flow, teachers are tired. There's not enough teachers. They're burnt out. Parents are scared. Kids are kind of caught in the middle. So I just want to talk about this stuff. I think it's important. And, again, at the end of the day, it's personal. It's a personal choice that you and your partner and your family. And again, I'm talking to most of the moms out there, but dads, I see you guys too. Your heart is in it. You just express it differently for the most part. Generals, right? So on that note, that's what I wanted to talk about. Mindsets and how we can shift our paradigm. And I will always be tapping into this because parenting is a journey and that we learn over time. And sometimes we make mistakes and that's okay. We just have to kind of go back and say, whoops, let's start again. As I put together these episodes week after week, I think about my parenting journey. My daughter's 21, soon to be 22. And, I was pretty solid in that birth to, 10. And then that tween stuff hit me like a ton of bricks. And it was like, whoops, this is a whole different mindset. And so like the mom that I was referencing earlier, she's a middle school teacher and she's like, I thought I had this, but this baby, toddler, preschool stuff, this is a whole different ball of wax. And so nobody has the magic bullet. There is none. And nobody has the perfect answers. And I think we all have to stay open, again, that growth mindset, to explore and to understand that our purpose here on this life is to always grow and learn and change and build and expand and be better. And sometimes we mess up, and I get that. I am in it with you. I understand, and trust me. It is so dang personal. I mean, being a parent, I think, is the most personal thing that any of us will take on. And so I am so grateful to all of you for listening through this and contemplating. And some of you are shaking your head and saying, yes, I agree with you. And some of you are saying, Erin, you might be full of it, and you're losing me here. But be willing to be open, to have that growth mindset, to respect science and to use that as a starting point, and then to see what happens in real life, in real time. That's kind of my framework. That's how I have done my practice. That's how I, have raised my daughter, and be open forevermore to recognize that I will continue to learn and hopefully expand my skill set. Okay. If you know someone that could use a little guidance, please share Talking Toddlers with them, this episode or any other previous episode. I'd really, really appreciate it. All right, my dear friends, thank you so much for tuning in. Make sure you follow Talking Toddlers on your favorite platform. Leave a review and let me know that you really are loving certain episodes, and I will get back to you. It's every Tuesday, Talking Toddlers. Enjoy your week, and God bless you and your little ones and your family, and enjoy the sunshine and get outside and play. Okay, see you next time. Bye.